Nicki, I'll just start by saying a huge thank you for giving up some of your precious time during the first couple of weeks in January for joining us on the show today. It's brilliant to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And now I know that we've got 20 minutes to talk about you, which is going to be tough to try and fit it all in. But start wherever you like. I guess some of our guests literally do go back to childhood and inspirations from early childhood. Some start a little bit later, but give our listeners a bit of a flavor of you, your experience, and crucially, I think the role that kind of corporate ethics, responsibility, and sustainability have played in you doing what you've done so far.
Well, where to start? It's a great question. I suppose that I will start by saying I was born with my mum would say, overinflated sense of right and wrong. So fairness has always been, as a stamp your foot, scream, that's not fair, as a child for sure. But I didn't think that would impact on my career in quite the way it has initially, because I started life as a broadcast journalist. So I was a presenter with the BBC in regional radio for many, many, many years. Nearly 15 years. And it was an incredible life. And I loved it. And it was a complete and utter privilege to meet the people that I did and to share the stories of the extraordinary, ordinary people that I met on a day-to-day basis. And so storytelling came in then for me. But anyone who's worked in radio will tell you the early mornings to get to you. And they certainly got to me. And I had 2 kids and was juggling family life. It's quite hard to get childcare at 4:30 in the morning. So something it was cracking and it was going to be a big crack. And so reluctantly, I decided it was time to do something different. But what I knew, this is where the fairness thing and the right and wrong came in, I knew I didn't want to go and make mega bucks in PR for some whacking great corporate. And so I started exploring how I could bring my experience at the BBC and of being a storyteller to do some good. So I joined the third sector and I started working in education charities, and that was incredible. But then I was tempted to help start something called Bite Back. And Bite Back was sold to me as we've got a real problem with obesity in this country, especially in children. We need to fix it. We're going to set this organization up. It's going to be loads of movie stars and they're going to pressure people. So I said, yeah, that sounds interesting. That sounds cool. I don't think it should be movie stars. I think it should be young people. And James, who started things off alongside me, it was James that tempted me over, completely agreed, had the same vision. And so here we are 6 years later with young people right across the world who are campaigning for a better food system that supports a healthy future for all of them. But it's been a hard battle, and I know we'll get onto the details in a bit, Charlie, of why. But I've finally found a job that satiates that sense of right and wrong and fairness and wanting to make a difference with the storytelling element of what I do. And the icing on the cake of all of that is that I get to work with young people, and it's really hard. What we do, it's really hard. And I'm not sure I'd have made it this far if it wasn't for the young people. I thought being a BBC presenter was pretty cool and the privilege of a lifetime, and it was. But honestly, it didn't have a patch on this now. It is without doubt the privilege of my lifetime to work with the young people and for them to trust me with their stories and of the real human impact that this issue is having on the lives of ordinary people.
And Nicki, that was so beautifully introduced and nutshelled, if you like. And we will go into more depth and detail, I guess, on the work that you're doing at Bite Back. But just heading back for a second, I want to dive into your experience within radio and the impact that had for you. Like, what did you learn about people and about storytelling during that phase of your career? What were you obviously had this ingrained sense of right and wrong, as you've alluded to, from a very early age. But what was it that what were the main experiences that you had over that 15-year period in terms of learning lessons about people?
That's so interesting because there's a very sanitized version I could give you.
We don't like sanitized. We are unsanitized if possible.
Or I could give you the biggest lesson I learned, sadly, from my time at the BBC, which is this world isn't fair. And it doesn't matter whether there are so many reasons why it might not be fair. And I didn't think my time at the BBC was particularly fair, I'll be honest with you. When I started, I was very, very young. And actually, I grew up, I'm an army child, and I remember watching Kate Adie from War Zones on the news and just thinking Kate Adie was the most incredible woman. And I would practice in my bedroom and I'd go, this is Nicki Whiteman for the BBC from wherever it was from. And of course, my dad was involved in some of the conflicts that were being reported on the news, and he was often away when I was watching them. And so it felt very close to me. But I also used to sit and I'd watch the news and I'd think, what is the matter with people? Why are they fighting? And I couldn't understand that. So that's what I joined. I knew I wanted to be a journalist, but what I really wanted to be was a war reporter. And I never wanted to be the story. I wanted to be out there bringing real people's stories to people's living rooms. Mm-hmm. But very quickly, I'm also a boarding school survivor, right? So I went when I was 8. And I very quickly learned that in order to survive my boarding school at 8, which was pretty brutal at times and utterly charming at others, weird as often these little boarding schools are, that being funny was a good way to do that. And this sounds like such a cliche, but I became the entertainer very quickly, and I'd put on shows in the evening and and that kind of stuff. And so that element came with me a bit, and very quickly I was given a presenting job. And that wasn't what I went there for. I wanted to be a newsreader or a war reporter. I was so clear on that. And then suddenly I found myself in the hot seat as a 20-something-year-old woman. And I experienced some shocking behavior. And I experienced things that are not suitable to be shared on this podcast. And when it was me and I was in my 20s, and I used to say sometimes, do you think some really well-known DJs who are still employed by some of our greatest institutions would I'd come into the room to take over my show from these guys, and they would do she's resplendent in blue today, wearing a low-cut top, which, I wouldn't have been. And when I remember, I said to the boss, do you think we could lose that bit? Do you think somebody could perhaps mention? I'm not hearing. I was the only woman on the station. I'm not hearing the men getting that. And the response I got from, and I got this many, many, many times from several different editors, is, yeah, wow, quite lucky to be doing what you're doing, Nicki. There's lots of people that do what you're doing, and that's like a lowbrow version of some of the stuff that I was exposed to. And then I had 2 girls, and to accept that sort of stuff, for me, was one thing. But to continue accepting it felt like I was accepting it on behalf of my children, and I wasn't prepared to do that. And so the 4:30 in the morning, difficult to get childcare story is part of it, for sure. But a big part of it was I got utterly fed up with the misogynistic attitudes that I was exposed to in that role. And there was always a sense of blonde woman, bit funny, she's there for a giggle. And, the smarter side of my personality was often brushed over. I remember once wanting to try out to read the news on TV, because that was my real dream. They said, well, you could, but you'd have to cut your hair off. Yeah, and I just had long blonde hair at the time. And I often mull over that now. And I think, well, somebody said that to me in my career now. Yeah, you could do that, but you'd have to cut your hair. I'd have something to say about it. But when you're 24 years old and you feel privileged to be at a great institution, you just kind of go, oh, okay. So yeah, I came out of that pretty crushed, which is partly why I am so passionate about the young people I work with now, because people do crush you, right? But if you can if you can help them find their authentic voices and have the courage to use them, then that's probably one of the most powerful traits you'll have in life.
And that, Nicki, you perfectly segued that on, because I was going to ask you about, you get to the end of your time at the BBC, and as you quite rightly mentioned, you had a decision to make. You could have gone and cashed in essentially, and looked into the kind of the large corporate world of PR, or you could decide to do something really impactful and really meaningful. Like, what that personal experience that you've just shared with us of your time at BBC, like, was that a key driver for you to say, no, I'm not going to play part of perhaps these games, if you like, that I'm getting a sense of working within the BBC? I want to go and do something different. Was that part of the drive?
Yeah, I think so. And I think like life has this, I'm of an age now where I look back and I really believe stuff happens for a reason. But I do now see the path that I went on. I think it was in part the BBC. I think it was in part the rigid conformity of a boarding school lifestyle. Any manager who's ever managed me will tell you I'm a nightmare to manage. And I used to think that was an insult. I'm now fiercely proud of that. And I'm deliciously unemployable now, right? My boss, James, now is a genius that he manages to maintain me. But I do that because I've always said, why? Is that the right way? And if it isn't the right way, I've always been able to speak up. It doesn't mean that I'm not shaking like a leaf under the table when I'm speaking up. I am, but I've been born with this inability to hold that back, which is a complete curse. But I'm coming to embrace it and it's hard for women, right? Because women with opinions and is not always welcomed, even now. And yeah, so I think it was part what happened at the BBC, but I didn't have an easy teenage period, and I battled with food from about the age of 14 onwards, and I have always felt like life is a battle with food, and I heard someone on the news last night. I watched a panorama about Ozempic, and I heard a woman. And there was an amazing woman on there. She said, "I have a lot of food noise," and I was like, "Yeah, I get that." And I think those of us do, right? But I did have a lot, and of course, you go from boarding school where you have this weird world where they slap food in front of you. In my first school, you couldn't leave the table till you'd finished it. We were also marked for our manners. Can you imagine that? And some people were put in what was called the pigsty and made to eat on their own. I was a boa constrictor for years. That was a rank. I mean, these things are bonkers when you look at them with adult eyes. So I did have a real battle with food, and it was a private battle. My closest friends are very, very aware of it, but not many people are. And some of my closest friends now, adult friends, are not. And it was a private battle. And so when I went to Bite Back, I was like, I started looking into this issue. And then this fire was lit, because for the first time in my life, I realized that actually it wasn't this weird weakness in me. It wasn't something that was lacking in me, but that actually there was a concerted and deliberate effort going on to influence me from the day I was born. And this idea, I remember the day where I kind of went, maybe it's not all my fault that I think about food all the time. Maybe it's not all me, was incredibly empowering and incredibly liberating. And I felt this relief. And I thought, if I feel this relief, everybody who's in my position has a right to feel it too. But that means telling a very different story to the one that popular culture tells us. And that means opening new mindsets in people, which is what Bite Back is here to do through the voices of young people. Yeah.
Nicki, that was, again, I think for people that we get feedback from listeners of the show who listen to people that are as professionally senior as somebody like yourself, sharing that kind of insight and people mentioning that it's amazing to hear the sort of the very human experience, I guess, that people have been through, that they can align with. And I imagine that what you've just shared with us there will have that effect too. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to ask you about that experience of going into, you know, you mentioned that you worked with some charities before you joined Bite Back that were, you know, focused on children and focused on education. You explaining your experience as a young person growing up, I can it's very evident the alignment of, well, I want to go and help influence you know, children at that age, young people at that age, to help them not maybe experience some of the things that I did. But can you just talk us through the organizations perhaps that you worked with and some of the experience that you had between leaving the BBC and joining Bite Back?
I'm going to tell you a really quick story. I hope we got time for it.
So
when I was working in the radio, obviously I had to get up at an ungodly hour. And that meant that I went to bed at a very sensible hour. I'm also married, wasn't at the time. We were living together, but we weren't married, to a frontline police officer. And I was lying in bed. It was about 8:30 at night on a Friday night. And I had a show starting at 6 a.m. on the Saturday morning. And I had my window open and I heard this weird noises outside my window. We lived in a lovely, a tiny little place, but in a back end of nowhere. So they were weird noises. So I got out of bed and I looked out the window and I saw these two hooded guys in the lane, and there was something really weird about them. And I realized now that it's that they had socks on their hands, and the security light came on and I saw them and they started smashing my neighbor's car up. And so I rang 999. I thought, do I ring my husband? But it wasn't my husband. I ring my boyfriend, I would ring 999. I had this sort of weird, like, oh, it's very British. Oh, I don't want to be a bother. And then I thought, there's a burglary going on. Ring 999, you idiot. So I did. And this incredible woman, I never found out who she was, Charlie. And there's this thing on Radio 4 they do on a Saturday morning, and you say thank you. And if I did mine, it would be to this woman on the 999 call handler. So I said, there's two men, they're breaking into the car next door. And it was all quite calm at that point. And then they went and they smashed my car up, and they went into our garage, and I could see there were, and she says, all right, the police are on the way, don't worry. And I said, yeah, it's not nice what they're doing. But then they finished with the cars, and then they came in to come into the house. And at that point I thought I might have a little, like, because I'm quite fierce in a verbal dialogue. It turns out that I do not have a shred of bravery in these kind of situations. And I'm just like, hats off to the frontline officers who do what they do. But I was absolutely terrified, Charlie. I was shaking like a leaf. And I said to her, they're coming into the house. And she said, don't worry, the police are on scene. And they weren't. I could see it was pitch black. Meanwhile, my then boyfriend was driving and heard over the radio, burglary in progress. And he thought it was our next door neighbor. So he got on the radio and he said, yeah, that's my next door neighbor. Somebody could head there quite fast. Then he heard caller's name, Nicki Whiteman, and he went on the radio. He went, "That's my house." At which point, of course, he diverted, and there were already officers on the way. But because he knew the area and it was a dark lane, he told everybody, turn lights and sirens off, go in darkness on foot. Otherwise, we'll never catch them. They'll run away, and we'll never get them in the dark. So I couldn't see them. So they were coming in the house, and I was going, they're coming in the house, please help me. And I was locked in the bathroom. And she was so incredible, this woman. She said, I promise you, Nicki, I promise you they're there. And I said, I think they've gone the wrong place. They're not here. They're coming in. And she said, Nicki, they're on scene. And then suddenly all the security lights went on. There were police. It felt like everywhere. The two guys were slammed on the floor. And as one of them was slammed on the floor, a security light went on. And that face looked up, and it was my husband. And I went to the 999 woman, they've got them. It's my Adrian. It's my Adrian. And she went, Nicki, I'm going to cut the call now. I'm so pleased you're safe. And I never got her name, and I never said thank you, but she was incredible, that woman. Anyway, it turned out one of them was not more than a child. And lived here. And when I discovered that, and I was like, so, I don't know what the right word is, but taken with how he ended up doing what he was doing versus other kids that live in the same place, that went to the same school. And so through the radio, I'd heard about restorative justice. I don't know if you know about this. They were trialing it in Thames Valley at the time. So I requested to do restorative justice with this young man. And so I met with him with a panel, and it was an incredible experience. And they say to you, is there anything you would like so-and-so to do by way of, saying sorry? And I said, they were expecting me to say, you know, could he pick up litter for 2 weeks, or could he, you know, I don't know. And I went, do you know what there is? What I want is for you to grow me a courgette. And the panel kind of went, oh gosh, she's lost it. She's lost it. And I went, I'm serious, right? Because I said, I want you to plant a seed and I want you to look after that plant. And if you bring me a courgette, right, what that says to me is that you have looked after it, you've got something out. And I said, because that's you got, that is life for you now. You've got options. And I asked him, what's the most valuable thing you've got? And he said, I got a pair of football boots that were Theo Walcott's because he went to school around here. And I said, what stops me coming into your house, going upstairs, getting your football boots, taking them in the garden and setting them on fire? I said, because I can do that. Physically, I can do that just as easily as you can break into my house. And he went, I don't know. And I said, because I've got too much respect for you. And I've got too much respect for your belongings and for your right to have them. And I want you to learn that respect for everyone that lives in our community. And my husband mentored him. And as far as I know, that was a good few years ago now. He's doing really great and went on to become a builder's apprentice. And so I knew that actually sometimes all it takes is for an intervention, right, is the horrible word that the third sector use. So that's why I wanted to join education charities. And actually I got my first job out of the BBC by telling that story in the interview, because that's why I wanted to help. And that charity that I started with was supporting the 1 in 5 children that are falling behind in the classroom, 1 in 5. So I loved that, right? But there is something unbelievably personal about the mission of Bite Back that just took me away from education. I think there is so much about education that is fascinating and brilliant. Of course, we're still involved in a way because school food is a big part of what we talk about as a massive opportunity, school food, to make sure every child has what they need to thrive and do well. But yeah, once when the food thing came along, I had one of those moments, which are the best in life, I've come to realize, where I was thinking, I don't know, I don't know about this. This will be a learning curve. And it surely was. And one that I'm very grateful to have gone on.
Nicki, it's absolutely compelling. I'm just envisaging you sitting in front of the board, suggesting that you want a courgette to be grown, and the absolute look of shock.
Well, I didn't tell you the best bit, which was I came back home. And you're so tired when you've been up since 4:30. That is a weird sort of jet lag feeling. And I came home in this slightly weird jet lag. And on my doorstep was a load of hyacinths. And there was a note. And it said, Nicki, I couldn't manage to do the courgette, but I grew these for you instead. Oh. And even now, my throat closes. That was like a pivotal moment in my life. That was.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. It's so lovely, and it's so lovely to hear that you've kept up with how the young man is doing, and that this is.
He's long gone from my life now, and that's exactly how he'd like it, and quite rightly. But yeah, as far as I know, he's doing brilliantly.
Fantastic. Well, look, I want to ask you one more question before we move on to talk about today's article, and it actually relates to it's slightly shifting towards the article's focus, but you mentioned watching the Panorama last night, which I saw as well. I have to admit, I sat there watching it with my partner, Vic, who I think I've mentioned to you before, works at Riverford Organic, and she was immediately, into, this is so ridiculous that we have a situation whereby our food system is such that this is ultimately the outcome that we're realizing in our health system. Can you just, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, but can you just summarize for our listeners kind of what the show covered, and perhaps just pick out from your perspective what your view of it was from a health food from a food and a health perspective?
Yeah, and look, I was hooked. So it was a panorama that followed the personal story of 3 people whose health is being dramatically impacted by their relationship with food, and how Ozempic has addressed that. And I totally understand why Vic comes at it from that point of view. there is an enormous part of my being that does too. But actually, Chris Van Turken said something really helpful to me the other day, which was Ozempic is the chemotherapy.
Yeah.
So if your life is directly at risk, and I absolutely believe this, if your life is directly at risk as a result of your weight, there is undoubtedly a role for Ozempic to play. What it did show was a clip of Sharon Osbourne in Hollywood saying, there's nothing wrong if we want to take this stuff. And that's the bit where I fall out of line, because it is utterly, utterly crazy to me that we would want to live in a world where we deliberately set out, and it is deliberate, to damage children's chances of a future, to then medicate it. Along the way, making billions for the big food companies and unimaginable amounts for big pharma. And sometimes when you think of it like that, and this is right at the start, I was saying to you, sometimes this job is really hard. It often is really hard because it can feel way too big.
Sure.
But I was on a call with someone I've worked with in big food from one of the big food companies on Friday. And I said, listen, I'm going to be annoying, but in my relentless pursuit of driving change, I'm going to oversimplify. And sometimes we need to simplify, right? Because complexity is the enemy of progress.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really simple. And I'm sure Vic looks at it as somebody who works with an organic veg company. It's desperately simple, and yet it's incredibly complicated. So I think there is a place for things like Wegovy and Ozempic. I think they're the, if misused, they're the enemy of protecting our children. I mean, ask any parent, what do you see for your child? You thinking Ozempic? Yeah, by sort of 45? You thinking that? There's not a parent on the planet goes, yeah, no, that's great, we've got that. Yeah, so I just give them whatever they want now so that because we've got Ozempic. There's not a parent on the planet that's seeing that as the answer. What we need is a food system that isn't rigged against children as it currently is, that doesn't target children deliberately, that doesn't mislead all of us, but especially children, about what's in our food, but that is held to account by governments, because these guys are so powerful, right? So powerful that governments need to legislate. And here's the thing. When I say this, people sometimes go, do they? I'm like, well, here's the thing. There is a law that says if there's over 1.2% alcohol in a product, you can't put a health claim on it. No such law about sugar, salt, that. You can say whatever you like as long as it's loosely true. So if I told you, Charlie, that there's the same amount of sugar in a Naked Blue Machine smoothie as there is in a Monster energy drink, and that's absolutely true, 53 grams, which is nearly twice what you should have in a day if you want to be healthy. It's nearly 3 times what epidemiologists recommend you have if you want to live a long and a healthy life. That's a world gone mad, right? And in that context, there is no place for weight loss drugs to be making profits that they are. Fix that context, fix that world that we're living in, and weight loss drugs are there for the emergencies. You know, for the 5%, not the 63% who are now at risk or already have a food-related health problem in this country. 63% of us, over 2/3.
Here, Nicki, you have absolutely nailed that. For anybody that's listening in, I would strongly recommend going back and watching that panorama from, it would be in the 13th of January when it was first aired. It's but Nicki has just provided you with both a brilliant summary and a clear conclusion from one that I imagine most people would have, having watched it. Nicki, let's move on now, if possible. Would you mind, I'm asking you to do it again, though, I appreciate I'm putting you on the spot again, but would you mind summarizing the article from Brenda Pearson in Reuters from the end of last year? Obviously very much aligned with the themes that you've just alluded to, but would you mind summarizing it for us?
Yeah, sure. So this was a case in the States, strategic litigation where the big food companies, some of the big food companies, Nestle, Mondelez, you may not have heard of Mondelez. They're brilliant at hiding behind brands like Cadbury, I'm afraid, Green and Black, so all that kind of stuff. They're enormous, vast. And this was a piece of strategic litigation brought by an individual who blamed the fact that he was very sick from type 2 diabetes on being misled by these companies about what was in their food, particularly the sugar that was in their food.
And brilliant summarised. Again, we will link to the article for anybody that's interested in reading the full piece. Nicki, what were the most interesting points that you found in that article? What were the things that really struck you?
The thing I cheer about when I see stuff like that, right, because strategic litigation is not cheap. And I admire the bravery of the people behind it, because you're taking on Mondelez and Nestle. So for those that have never, and I would understand why, wasted your life by digging into the kind of profits that companies like Nestle and Mondelez make, let me just tell you, it's equivalent to the GDP of a small country, right? This is how powerful these global conglomerates are. And so to take them on and to take them on in the courts, take them on anywhere is brave, but to take them on in the courts is off the scale brave, incredibly expensive, and your chances of winning against just the power dynamic of that is questionable. What it is a brilliant vehicle for storytelling. What it means, Charlie, is you and I are talking about it right now, and that's why I would love to see us. Strategic litigation isn't quite the beast in this country that it is in the US, but I'd like to see somebody take on one of these companies. And I know it's been done a few times in the States, because what it does is start the conversation. And the conversation is the thing that needs to shift, because I'll say it again. We think of health as a personal responsibility in this country. We think of children's health as a parental responsibility. What we don't question is the world around us and the influence it's having on us and on our health. And by blaming ourselves or blaming parents for it, the dangerous thing about that is we are giving big food companies a license to continue to do exactly what they're doing. And I've sat in rooms with them so many times, and they've looked me in the eye and they've gone, nobody's forcing anyone to eat this stuff. And that is the enemy, right? Because that's their permission to carry on putting 53 grams of sugar in a smoothie, and on the front of it telling you that it's one of your 5 a day, that it's packed with goodness, that it's 100% natural. Everything about the product tells you it's health. It's not. It's the absolute opposite. Cereals are a great example. When I'm in my naughtiest of moods, I might sometimes call them serial killers. Not all of them. But if you take the cereal aisle, the cereal market, and this is Kellogg's, one of the Big 10, enormous company. Nestle own huge amounts of cereals. They have taken over an entire mealtime across entire demographics, across the entire developed world. Unbelievable. And for so many decades, we haven't questioned them. And when people started to, there was like the love for these brands and the bond that's been created by these marketing and advertising geniuses who think of everything, by the way. They know your own mind better than you do. They're so clever and they're so brilliant at what they've done, but we kind of defend them. But actually, there is something horrible about seeing the way, and next time you're in the supermarket, just walk down the cereal aisle, and if there's little children there, what you'll see is they get pulled. They get pulled towards the cartoon character. They get pulled towards the bright colors, the games on the side, the fun. And then look at the sugar that's in that pack. And listen, read the small print, right? Don't look at the big green wheat thing on the front. You know, when it says packed with B vitamins, fortified with iron, you know, great. If it's in big writing, gloss. If it's tiny, hone in. But my point, Charlie, is we shouldn't have to. The world has done wrong where I'm having to say that to you. If you want to protect your children, these are the steps that I would suggest you take. No parent should have to be doing that. The onus should be on those big companies to behave in a way that is honest, transparent, and supports our children to thrive. In any other context, if companies were doing things that deliberately harmed our children, we call them out. But for some reason, because they put pretty cartoons, they've got great ads on telly, and our favorite sports stars seem to side with them, we don't question them. And we have to start questioning them.
And Nicki, that was absolutely fantastic as well, in terms of providing that context for our listeners. Is it too simplistic to say that sort of those, the big food companies have essentially encouraged us to be distracted looking at the personal responsibility that I think it's brilliant that we're having this conversation at the beginning of January. I mean, this is the time, isn't it, when everybody's had a fairly gluttonous Christmas and New Year. We're all sitting around going, right, I really need to pull myself together here. I need to sign up to the gym. I need to get to these classes, etc. I need to start eating clean. It's all on me. It's all on my behavior. Is it just purely that the whole system's set up to distract, as you've alluded to, away from what the food companies are doing, and instead to look at my responsibility for
It's exactly that. And it's exactly the same way they did it for tobacco. In fact, 2 of the biggest food companies were founded by the big cheeses from, pardon the pun, from Philip Morris and the tobacco companies. It's the same tactics. I heard a thing the other day. Do you know the inside of some chocolate wrappers is shiny? Mm-hmm. And it never occurred to me to even think about that. And apparently the reason it's shiny is because that triggers something in the brain which makes the chocolate taste even better. I was like, whoa. Oh. This is the level to which none of it is accidental. It is so brilliant. It is brilliant. One of our young people sat on a stage last summer in Chicago talking to the CEOs of the big food companies. And it's worth watching this clip. You can see it on our social channels. But she said, look, you guys are brilliant. Brilliant. Like she said, I can't remember the exact words, but she said, it freaks me out how you know my mind before I do. But that brilliance comes with a responsibility. And you are responsible for using that brilliance to support my health, not damage it. And that's what I'm asking you to do. Don't be any less brilliant, because think about it. Think about how clever they are. Imagine if that wasn't being used to damage health, but was being used as a force for good. Imagine if you turn the tables. Imagine what the world might look like.
And Nicki, just to play devil's advocate with that, and you've already alluded to this during this show, and again, I don't want to be sued here, so I don't know if I might be getting my words or my observations wrong here, but you've already alluded to the relationship between the food industry and the health industry, big pharma. Like, is it too simplistic to view it as the status quo as it is all about how the two relate to one another, and there's such obscene amounts of money to be made that actually the two go hand in hand, and the same actors are involved? Or am I being overly pessimistic with that?
I don't. I mean, I can possibly know the actors, as it were. What I know is that the food system is so broken that that children born today are likely to live less long than their parents did for the first time in the history of mankind. And what I know is that Big Pharma are making billions from these drugs, right? How those two things interlink, I don't know, but the two things exist. What I do know is how food industry use popular culture to perpetuate a helpful narrative for themselves, which is one of personal responsibility, but also to ensure, and you remember that woman on the documentary last night said, I got a lot of noise, have you got a lot of noise? Or is there just a lot of noise? And I remember when, do you know what? I said this the other day and I never said it out loud. I was really frightened of having girls. Really frightened. Because I didn't want them to have my battle with food. And I've got 2 girls. And I had hoped when I started they were quite little. And I'd hoped it would all be fixed in time for them to be teenagers. And it hasn't been. I've got an 18-year-old and we didn't do anything for her. And if you think about their lives, right, especially girls, but I think more and more it's true for boys too. You're told you're only valuable if you look a certain way. So girls, you're only valuable if you're thin. Boys, you're only valuable if you're ripped. Be thin, be ripped, be thin, be ripped. And then every other second, up on your social media feed, flashes Snoop Dogg, just eat. Flashes McDonald's. Flashes KFC. Monster, you name it. 15 billion junk food ads seen by kids every year. So you're being told, be thin, eat, be thin, eat, be thin, be ripped, eat, be ripped, eat, thin. It's a wonder any child comes out unscathed. And so there also is a huge link between what we call the cultural wallpaper and the well-being of our children. I mean, I tell our kids at Bite Back when they start, we kind of do an introduction to all the ways in which the food system is rigged against them. I've never yet come across a young person that doesn't go, "What? This is outrageous. I'm fed up." So many people say to me, "Teenagers love this stuff. They don't care." That is couldn't be further from the truth. But I say to them, you know what? The cigarettes used to sponsor sport. They're like, yeah. I mean, they can be quite a lot ruder when they reply to me. and I go, no, seriously. Like B&H did the cricket, Marlborough, all over F1. Honestly, it's like everywhere. They're like, no, F off. Are you serious? And we dream of a world at Bite Back where one day Fareed or Vin says to their kids, do you know what? McDonald's used to sponsor the Olympics. And their kids go, what? No way. That's bonkers. Because it is bonkers. And what we're trying to do at Bite Back is make the normal look weird, because it is. And so much of what food industry do is utterly, utterly ridiculous. Next time you're in your leisure center, your hospital canteen, look at what's happening at the checkout or in the vending machines. It's bonkers. Look at the way the golden arches surround the football pitches next time your favorite team is playing. By the way, next time your favorite team lift an energy drink to their lips, I happen to know from somebody on the inside, 9 times out of 10, there's no energy drink in there. They've replaced it with water. They're doing it because it's advertising. And I don't think these people are bad people. I don't think if I sat down, can you imagine, with Snoop Dogg, that would be a conversation. But if I sat down with Snoop Dogg and said, look, like in the States, you know, it's way more than a third of children. Their lives are going to be cut short or affected by a food-related health problem. This just eat message is not cool. And I don't think they're bad people. Every well-known person I've ever spoken to about this, and once they've had the penny drop moment, and I'm sorry if by listening to this podcast, your world doesn't look the same, but next time you're in the cinema, consider the fact that you can't walk into the movie till you've run the junk food gauntlet. Next time you're at a sports game, ask yourself, was it even remotely possible to eat healthily at this sports game? Next time you're in a train station or an airport, look at the difference. I tried to buy myself some fruit the other day in the airport, and the little thing of tub of fruit was in plastic and cost £5. Whereas I could have gone and got me a burger, chips, and a massive fizzy drink for £4. So once you see it, you can't unsee it, but the world has gone mad, and the result is our children are not going to have the futures that they deserve, and that's why it matters. It's not pious, it's not worthiness, it's not piety. It's that I was born believing that every child, through education, through whatever means, but now through food, has a right to what they need to thrive and do well, and we're just not seeing it. The world is just set against them. And it doesn't have to be. It can be fixed so easily. We know how to do it. It's not like climate. Like, we can fix this one.
So Nicki, I tell you what, you are an absolute, you can tell you've worked for 15 years in radio. You're the dream guest. You literally segue onto the next question. It's perfect. I was just about to ask you, what does, if, and a magic mystical ball situation, if you like, what does the food system operating correctly look like? What would it look like day to day? You beautifully described all the problems with what we have currently. what does it reformed look like?
So first up, we've all got to start talking about it differently. And we've all got to start recognizing the role the environment is playing. And this happened with tobacco, right? We used to talk about smoking as a behavior. And for years and years and years, decades, government after government spent millions on education campaigns to try and inform people about how bad it was for your health. And absolutely nothing happened to smoking rates. We have the same attitude now. We think if we educate people about what's healthy and what's not, they'll eat better. It doesn't work. We know it doesn't work, right? So in the same way, what happened with smoking is a deliberate movement of narrative shifters came along, and they moved it away from being about smoking as a behavior onto tobacco as a toxic product and the corporate malpractice that sat behind the making, marketing, and promotion of that product. We need to do the same with junk food. We need to stop talking about eating as a behavior, and we need to start talking about the problematic product and the companies that sit behind the making, marketing, and promotion of that product. And we need to hold them to account, because once we did that with smoking, it then became possible, easier, contextually ripe for governments to act. They legislated. Smoking became difficult, expensive. Smoking rates fell off a cliff. They've stayed there. If we do the same with food, because I promise you, I've spent many hours in rooms with big food. They will all tell you, they will all have a list of excuses as long as your arm why they can't be the first mover. And at the end of it will be your pension, right? That's what they'll say. We're accountable to shareholders. Well, as shareholders, we have some power, and we're starting to see this with climate. But in the first instance, what we need is for governments to legislate. So overnight, let's just stop advertising junk food. Why, in what world would you want your child to be targeted with a junk food ad? I don't think there's parent. I mean, I'm a mum, and I'm like, leave them alone. That's all we're asking for. Just leave them alone. Let them live free from pressure from big food, because big food goes round parents. I mean, you've got absolutely no way of protecting. I was speaking to a former government advisor the other day, and he said, well, my 9-year-old, I make sure that there's nothing on his iPad, and gave me this sort of quite defensive account of how he protects his 9-year-old boy. And I said, yeah, no, great. And good luck with that when he gets to secondary. Because one, it's not real, you cannot protect your children from the influence of these big food companies. And so somebody has to help us do it. And that is in the form of legislation. And let's not just stop. Let's start using all that advertising brilliance, right, to shine a light on healthy options instead. Instead of the spotlight always being on junk, let's just shift it. Let's push junk off stage. Let's put good stuff center stage. I think there's so many ways in which this can be fixed, and the problem comes often with big systemic failings. No one thing will fix it. Mm-hmm. And so when you put forward an argument for doing one thing, the lobbyists and the powers of big food come back and go, well, that's not going to change it. And they equate it to some ridiculous data set that the media love and pick up. But we have to start, and we have to start now, because the awful truth is it's far too late for some people. And I've got young people at Bite Back who are losing the people they love, or who are looking after the people they love because of food-related health problems through their teenage years. I have one young person who gave their mum CPR for 12 minutes. That's why this issue matters. These children have a right to their own futures, but they don't want to lose the people they love far too soon. We want grandparents, right, to see their grandchildren. And when I watched those people on the documentary last night, what I hope other people saw was not judgment or failing or a weakness. Because, by the way, if 63% of us can't manage, there's something gone horribly wrong. But I hope what they saw is human beings who passionately wanted a healthy life, but for whatever reason are victims of the noise. And I hope that's what comes out. But often the way we tell these stories through the media is not helpful. And it allows the stigma, which is the greatest enemy of progress here. And be careful of stigma, and be careful of your own thoughts and so many people have them, a judgment about why someone is a healthy weight or not, because that could be you, and it certainly could be somebody you love. And I've forgotten what your initial question was.
Nicki, that was absolutely brilliant. And I think what you've done, in all honesty, is that you provided we always conclude the show with a bit of a magic wand question of what change you'd like to see in the kind of corporate world. I think you've provided a very, very clear outlook, if you like, for changes that, as you say, are very accessible and doable. But I think you've presented that beautifully. I'll finish with one question though, not the magic one, but with another. Do you feel like progress is being made? Are you hopeful? You are.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, it's unbelievable the way things are tipping. So 5 years ago, you would never, ever, the headlines you would see would only ever be stigmatizing, only ever individualistic, only ever blaming of parents. We are on a journey now, for sure. We just ran a billboard campaign and we're about to run it again. It's really cool. We buy out the ad space so the junk food giants can't. And the graphic is the young people who bite back have bought this ad space so the junk food giants can't. We're giving kids a commercial break. And we vox popped people under that and said, what do you think about when you see that? And straight away, people are like, these companies are out of control. They are not giving the care and the thought they should to our children. In fact, they're profiting from ill health. I think it's outrageous. And I think governments need to be doing more to regulate these companies straight away. This is the conversation we need to be having. And I definitely, it used to be a hard slog in the early days. I used to spend my life trying to convince people or open people's eyes to the world, the role the world around us is having and the food environment has on us. Now, 9 times out of 10, people get it straight away. So I say, I find the supermarket so exhausting. That's all I have to say. Oh, me too. Oh, the messaging, and I hate the way they put the rubbish at the bottom there so that the children see it. It drives me mad. Why do I have to walk through a wall of rubbish in order to get to the fruit and veg? Off people go. People are really starting to see it. And that is exciting because that is the catalyst for change. Because at the end of this issue is a consumer. Mm. And Big Food will see it, and they're about profit and they're about shareholders. And in the same way now, no consumer-facing company is prepared to stand up there and say, the monkey's about climate change. Every single consumer-facing company has a chief sustainability officer. We want every single consumer-facing company to have a chief health officer who is accountable to the board and on the board for health. Because this is one of the greatest and most pressing issues of our time. And we will look back at the madness of the noughties and where the food system went so horribly wrong. And my message to corporates would be this: you can be a laggard, right? And you can stay determinedly true to your malpractices, or you can lead the field. And consumers will come with you. Because the awful truth is this, Charlie, this problem is a trajectory. And as the children I work with and the young people I work with start to lose the people they love, this issue will get louder and louder and louder. So start now and you'll be in the best position to take advantage of this tidal turn that we're going to see in consumer attitudes. Or, Mr. Nestlé and Mondelez, you carry on and let's see what happens to you further down the line.
Nicki, that was absolutely brilliant. I feel like we've crescendoed with a real kind of call to arms, which I think anybody listening in hopefully will really pick up on how brilliantly and eloquently you've just presented the argument, which I, for one, feel energized and enthused by myself and more educated. Thank you so much for joining us for an episode of Responsible Edge this morning. It's been absolutely brilliant having you on.
Thank you, Charlie. Thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Nicki Whiteman, Chief Brand and Youth Officer at Bite Back 2030 for joining us. Nicki was absolutely fantastic. Her leadership and advocating for systemic change in the food industry provided really sharp insights into the themes of today's conversation. Together, we unpacked the implications of an article titled "Lawsuit Accuses Major Food Companies of Marketing Addictive Foods to Kids," where we explored the ethical responsibilities of businesses, the broader health impact of ultra-processed foods, and how we can push for accountability and healthier futures. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.